You're listening to Science for Soundness, the podcast. This is not your usual podcast. This is a journey, and as with any journey, I don't know yet where this one is going. If anything, I'm hoping to inspire you to take the first step, even if it's into the unknown, even if you don't know where you're going and you do it scared. Hi, I'm Steffi. I'm an equine scientist and equine therapist. I've made it my mission to support horse owners on their individual journey of horse-human connection and personal growth. I want you to know that I'm with you on this one. Think of me as a friendly voice, a reminder to stay the course, to keep going, keep listening to yourself and to your horse, even when the going gets tough. Let's do this. Welcome back to Science for Soundness, the podcast. Today is a bit of a profound one, I feel like, because for so long I have been teaching about the 4 pillars of soundness and talked about them, taught on them. But today I kind of felt called to talk about something else. And that is because I was observing over the past 8-9 weeks or so, I've been observing something within my own herd that kind of got me thinking that there is a need for this to be its own thing. And I'm going to go into more detail in a second. So basically, we've spoken about the 4 pillars of soundness, and those were the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual soundness. And I still stand behind those. Each one of those forms an essential part of the whole that I understand to be soundness. And for the longest time, I tried to nestle what I'm about to share with you within those 4 pillars as kind of like a sub-layer of emotional or mental, even spiritual well-being. And I tried to make it fit, but it kind of doesn't, at least not fully. And it felt like it kept leaking out and surfacing in unexpected places, showing up in my horse's behavior, in their bodies and how they rested or didn't rest. And it kept tugging at me that this needs to be its own pillar. So today, I want to officially welcome a new addition, and that is the 5th pillar of soundness, social soundness. Now, before I dive into the details, I want to make something clear. This pillar, social soundness, isn't an add-on. It is not about horses liking their friends or playing in the paddock. This is about a core biological need, a nervous system function, a developmental requirement, something every horse and every human is wired for, and that is social soundness. It is the state in which a being is able to participate in, benefit from, and also feel safe within social relationships. As simple as that. That doesn't mean that they have to be social all the time. So, we don't have to engage socially all the time in order to fulfill this, but we, or they, as our horses, need the capacity to form healthy attachments, to read social cues, to co-regulate with others, and also to feel this sense of belonging and recognition within a group. That is essential. And without this, no matter how physically fit or emotionally expressive or mentally capable a horse or even a human is, something always will remain out of sync. So it's like a piece of the puzzle won't land because the nervous system never fully relaxes when the social world feels unsafe. So it really needed to become its own pillar, to stand on its own, to get the emphasis that I feel it requires. But let's back up for a moment and talk about what social soundness is not. It is not about dominance theory. And it's not about establishing a pecking order, air quotes, by the way. It's also not managing herds through constant separation, shuffling, or reactivity within the herd. And it is not assuming that a horse living alone or always with different companions is just fine because they're not outwardly stressed, not visibly stressed for us. Soundness, social soundness in this case, lives in the more subtle cues, in questions that I like to ask, and that is, can a horse rest deeply around other horses? Do they orient to the herd in a way that feels calm and flexible and fluid? So are they adaptable in those moments? Are they able to engage socially without overreacting or completely shutting down instead? And perhaps most importantly, do they feel safe being seen, being known, being mirrored and met? So do they feel safe being witnessed? And that's kind of like the core of what I do and why I do it, right? So I really feel happy to include this new pillar for you all. And I realized that there is more depth to this pillar through the story of one horse in particular, and that is Paul. And Yula, if you're listening, I hope you don't mind me sharing the story. So basically, I got some new boarders in. So Paul, the horse, she came with a lovely couple who own her, and we've been in constant exchange over where she comes from, what she needs, what she kind of experienced in the past. And we made the integration with my 3 horses work really well at the beginning. And I've observed that, and I kind of, I was feeling pretty confident, and I've done so many herd integrations at this point and observed and also helped others with the herd integrations, that I feel pretty confident about reading the cues that the horses give off to each other. And my horses are also pretty confident, so I thought. And Paul really surprised me at some stage because her behavior shifted from one day to the next. This is not about trying to find a solution for this situation. It's about understanding what is beneath that. And that is basically coming down to social soundness. So Paul was integrated, and I actually visited her in the previous home that she was in, and she was showing a lot of fawning behavior towards the other horses in her herd. They were out on a pasture, so they were all grazing, and she was a very submissive horse. And I could see that she, if another horse would come into her space and would ask her to please move, she would move, and she was very respectful of the boundaries. And that was enough for me to say, okay, she has an understanding of herd behavior, of the social cues that are being given, and she can take those and then transform them into an action that is required of her in that whatever given moment. But then something at some point during the integration in my herd started to shift, and it was after like 3 or 4 months. So she'd been integrated and going with the herd and settling into the rhythm of my horses. They have a really set routine every day, and she was kind of settling into that rhythm. But then from one day to the next, everything kind of changed, and that threw so many questions in my direction and also in her owner's direction, because we were kind of wondering what had happened and trying to make sense of her behavior. So it wasn't like she had any problems with training or with the human side of things. It was more to do with being alone in this social setting that was throwing out problems at us. And it wasn't like she didn't understand social cues either. She did understand those very well, but it kind of started to feel like she was speaking a little bit more loud and a little bit more expressive and a little bit maybe more than was necessary. Like the nuance was maybe all of a sudden she was shouting rather than just talking, and none of us, and it looked like none of the horses understood why. So like I said, we are investigating and we're on top of this, and we have many ideas and many routes that we could go down and explore. So that is not the reason why I'm sharing this. It's just to give you a little bit of a backstory of why I all of a sudden, I had this idea that, okay, I've been trying to fit the social soundness in with everything else, but it really is its own thing. Because if we don't feel safe in a social setting, if we don't feel like we can socially engage with others, then how, what does that tell us about the individual themselves? What does it tell us about their inner state? And her restlessness really did reflect that, really did mirror these kind of questions. Social soundness in humans, for example, could be reflected in children learning to read faces of their parents or even other adults or other people. It would be reflected in tuning into voices. You know, when you're listening to my tone of voice, the tonality of it, do you feel soothed by it, or does it irritate you? I mean, it could be either or, it could be both. But things, you know, social cues that we send off, or even feeling soothed by the presence of another, feeling safe in the presence of another. In horses, it's just as present as in humans, even if it's less obvious to the untrained eye. So what I found so interesting was how she was communicating, and she was kind of in with that, with the herd, but at the same time, there was a disconnect. So in horses, we would see that they're attuned to each other by soft eyes around each other. So if horses are standing in close proximity to each other, there is no vein popping out below the eyes. There are no wrinkles around their nostrils or their muzzle, and genuinely their faces look soft and just not strained. We might also see it in mutual grooming, and also, and that is something that I have observed with Paul, napping in close proximity. So she was actually taking a nap lying down behind Sun's hind legs. Now, for all of you who don't know, Sun is the lead mare in this herd, and she has been ever since. But being able to lie down behind her hind legs is a huge sign of trust and, you know, of being socially engaged and feeling safe in that setting. So some of the behavior just did not make sense because we saw some of this as well. But the thing is, the social engagement system, or, you know, being able to socially engage, it's not just emotional, it's also physiological. So it affects heart rate variability, respiration, hormonal balance, and long-term stress resilience. So when horses have an area of those that is underdeveloped or constantly disrupted for some reason or another, then the nervous system might not know how to rest in connection, if that makes sense. So the horse then doesn't know how to rest at all. And that is like this huge thing, like this huge, once I dove into that, there was so much more thinking about weaning. So I was asked at a clinic just a couple of weeks ago, what do I think is affecting this? And I told them early weaning. If we take horses away from their mothers, you know, they're not given the time they need on so many levels to develop in social contexts, right? Or also transporting horses to new homes multiple times before they get to a certain age. So they never kind of got to settle into a herd or a routine of some kind, constantly feeling uprooted again. So that's going to have an effect. Or if you keep horses in isolation, that is something I kept dwelling on when I was in the UK. There were a lot of horses kept in singular confinement. And to me, it doesn't matter if you put a horse in a field by themselves or in a box by themselves, you know, they're still by themselves. Sometimes that's necessary, for example, to integrate or reintegrate, or if there is a medical reason or something like that. But to do this for years and years nonstop without a particular reason other than being worried they might hurt each other is not really equine welfare friendly either. So that is a big thing that might affect how horses are able to engage socially. And think about, you know, the average modern horse's life. This is all of these things are happening more often than we think. Separation from familiar herd members during training or shows or even sales, or social groups that shift constantly with very little stability. I think that one is massive. So my herd has been together since, basically ever since we got to this place, and all of the core members are still there. I mean, we've had some deaths, which was tragic, but the core members are still the core members, and my horses are still my horses, and they're always going to be a herd. So they have a really stable bond. But what about horses who don't get that because they get moved around a lot for various reasons? I mean, you know, this is not to shame people because sometimes this happens, but it will have an effect is all I'm trying to say. And the body will keep track, you know. even when they're coping just fine on the outside or doing fine, or even if they're well behaved on the outside, their nervous system is still holding that story. And sometimes, if you've heard me in other podcasts before, sometimes that behavior is also a survival mode, like being shut down, actually. So, there is so much nuance to it, and there's so much to dive into that I cannot possibly put into one podcast episode. And I don't want to, quite frankly, because I think, if you want to dive deeper into these topics, then you're more than welcome to join me inside the inner circle, and we can have long discussions on it. But I just want to share a couple of more things. So what we miss when we don't name social soundness is we are trying to fix things through training. And in that case, it just doesn't work because it's nothing to do with training. Sometimes we try to create more structure, or we assume that the horse is being difficult or lazy or needy or whatever, give it a label, all in air quotes, by the way. And we try to pathologize what might actually be a very understandable response to a disrupted social world. So we miss the opportunity to repair something that can actually be healed, not through obedience or desensitization, but through recognition and then consistency and co-regulation. So in our case, we are not changing her whole world again by saying, okay, you have to leave. My goal and aim is to reintegrate her into this herd once we've got to the bottom of, some of the things that might be influencing this behavior. And, with veterinary contribution to it as well. So we are on top of that, but I'm not changing her entire routine. The routine is still the same. The feeding routine is still the same. The pasture routine is still the same. And she's still next to the herd, and she's still part of that herd. She's just got her own safe space for the moment. And she feels actually pretty content with that. So, recognizing the thing that is going on socially, and then still offering consistency to our horses is so important. And then co-regulation, with the human, she's doing pretty awesome, and with the horses, she can choose if she wants to, or if it's too much for her for whatever reason, she can walk away. She doesn't have to, which, when horses are within a herd and they feel overwhelmed in that social setting and they lash out or they want to go away but they can't get away because it is still a paddock at the end of the day, even if it's a track, then that can be overstimulating and overwhelming and actually not feel pretty good. So recognizing that and offering opportunities for co-regulation without forcing them to interact is huge. So the thing that I found really interesting with Paul was that after giving her space to watch the others without being immersed, like I just said, she had her own safe space. After, adjusting that for her, we saw that she slowly softened. I mean, there is still that restlessness, but at the same time, she can choose, and she does choose, close proximity, standing at the fence near the others rather than away from the others. And it's because she's quietly interested in them, not because she is fearful of something else or dependent on them. It's kind of like she's reinterested in them again. She also lies down with them near the fence again. She just in herself started to breathe and feel more relaxed. And not just I myself noticed that, but also her owners noticed that. It is actually helping her to unwind again. So it really isn't about hierarchy or dominance or management even. It is about the nervous system. Again, it's about relational repair, and it's about social soundness. So that's where we are. What does this mean practically? It means we must start asking different questions, you guys. I mean, I always encourage you to ask different questions anyway, but we need to ask different questions, especially in this kind of context. Is this horse socially sound? Not just her, but any horse we're looking at. Are they socially sound? Are their needs being met for belonging, for mirroring, for safe proximity? Do they get that? Is their nervous system able to rest in the presence of others? Could be horses, but it could also be humans. Do they have consistent familiar relationships? Not just any horses, but I mean, like my core herd, the same horses over a long, long time. And that also means, the flip side, noticing the signs of social dysregulation. So a horse who follows others obsessively, but then panics when they're alone, or a horse who isolates themselves, even in group settings, is also kind of standing out. Or constant hypervigilance in herds, like being constantly on the lookout, constantly flinching at everything, like I described poor at the beginning of this podcast episode. Also, horses who can't sleep deeply around other horses. The social dysregulation is real in that case. Or even overreactions to social cues. So a small movement from one horse triggering a massive startle from another. Or it could also be triggering a massive response in return. And that is something that we observed, which is why we decided to offer her own safe space. And instead of blaming the horse or blaming the group or blaming anyone really, we are asking what part of their social world has been disrupted. How can we rebuild that sense of safety slowly and intentionally so that they start to feel more safe again and able to connect with themselves, but also with others. And you guys, this matters for us too, because we are part of their social environment. Our nervous systems, our rhythms, our relational patterns, they do matter. If we want to help horses become socially sound, we must also tend to our own social engagement systems. We must repair what was ruptured in us, the part of us that fears belonging maybe, that fears being seen, that fears resting in relationship. This is the beauty of it. Social soundness isn't just another checkbox on the list of horsemanship. It really is an invitation to meet horses and also ourselves in a truer form of connection. And I'm all here for that. So today I invite you to reflect where in your horse's life might social soundness need more support from you. Where in your own life do you feel safe in relationship? And where do you still brace? So, just that tension that keeps coming up, where is that? And then how might your presence help repair the social nervous system in both directions? Just think about those for a little bit. If this feels interesting, if this feels like it's something that could excite you or, you're experiencing at the moment, either yourself or with your horse, or you witness someone with their horse, then I would love to invite you into the Inner Circle membership. This is the space where we dive deeper into these pillars with case studies, video examples, gentle practices that you can then use to begin restoring social soundness in your own context. We're not just talking theory. We do a lot of that in our check-in calls because people bring questions and things come up, but we're also living it through the quiet moments, observed patterns, and horses like Paul who teach us what true connection looks like and where we might need support. So if you'd like to join us, comment Inner Circle on Instagram on any of my posts and you'll get the details via DM. You can also visit scienceforsoundness.com. You'll get immediate access to everything we've created so far and what's to come. And if you use the code podcast upon sign up for the Inner Circle, you save €10 on your first month of your monthly membership. When we honor this pillar, social soundness, when we name it and then tend to it, everything else begins to fall into place. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time, friends, take care of yourselves, your nervous systems, and your horses. Much love, always. Hi, friend. I hope you found something in this episode that resonated with you. I am beyond grateful that you hung out with me today for a little while, and I do hope that you come along for the ride. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and if you feel like it, leave a review. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. If you have any questions or would like me to talk about a certain topic, check the show notes for ways to get in touch. I can't wait for next time. You got this.